Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, for 2 years, spin scooters have been everywhere. And I mean literally, on city streets, cluttered over sidewalks, blocking curb cuts, abandoned in the tunnels, inside public trash cans, and curiously, even up a few bushes and trees. Honestly, y'all, I admire the commitment. Those things are really heavy. And they're still laying around the city, but you can't ride them anymore. Today, we're talking about why. It's Wednesday, July 19th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with Ann Belzer, the editor of Print, a real honest-to-God newspaper covering our city's East End neighborhoods. Ann, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
So you've been following these scooters for Print and in Next Pittsburgh. How did we get these scooters in the first place?
Well, I'm not literally following them. It's more like I don't run after them.
I respect if you did.
Oh, well, I'd have to be pretty quick. So how did we get here? This was a pilot program. Scooters are not allowed in Pennsylvania. And right now, none of them are. You aren't supposed to have a private scooter, electric scooter on the roads. You aren't supposed to have them on the sidewalks. I mean, if you have like a couple hundred acres, you could ride your scooter around it, I guess. But
four-wheelers.
Yeah, exactly. But you're not supposed to have scooters on public right-of-ways. And Spin Scooter and Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, they got a pilot program in, which was the city could negotiate with one scooter company. The legislature approved it for 2 years to see how it worked. And the city could pick one company. They had a deal with them where it was just a $150 permit plus 10 cents per ride. The 10 cents per ride went to building those little scooter corrals. The word scooter is so absurd. But the little corrals, they had like little boxes painted in the street with a little scooter in it for parking.
Yeah. Some were better than others.
Well, I think Spin paid for those, like the fancy ones that you could plug them into. So they had that set up just for 2 years. Right. There was a 2-year pilot by the legislature, allowed by the legislature. And that expired this month.
Yeah. Did you ever ride one of the scooters, Ann?
I never did. I mean, I kind of wanted to. But I didn't oh my God. You had to do this whole thing with an app and stuff. And
there's an app. You had to take a few questions, like answer a few questionnaires to make sure that you weren't going to do anything too stupid on it. You get a discount if you wore a helmet.
Did you really?
Yeah. Allegedly. I never did it.
Okay. I mean, actually what happened was when I looked it up and I was like 39 cents a minute and I did the math, I was like, that's more expensive than the bus. So,
and even Uber and Lyft were actually often cheaper. I rode scooters. I kind of was excited about them when they first came here because I'd ridden them in California and other cities. And there's just a lot more rules around how they operate and when they operate and at what speeds. But Pittsburgh did it differently, and I never found the user experience very good.
Right. Of course, I saw them. They would be like left in front of my house and left at my corner. And...
Yeah, you could drop them anywhere depending on like how high traffic it was, but it wasn't clear to me what the rules were, which I think is like kind of at issue here. So like we had them for 2 years. Now they've been indefinitely paused. What happened, or I guess didn't happen, that shut them down in the last week?
So there was legislation that was part in the Transportation Committee, the Senate Transportation Committee, and it actually passed out of it. And that would have allowed scooters only rental scooters and only in cities that made this deal with scooter companies. So statewide, there wouldn't have been scooters in Mars or Cranberry or someplace like that. Yeah. But they would be allowed in like Duquesne and McKeesport if they wanted to, because it had to be a city, so like Scranton could have scooters and Wilkes-Barre could have scooters, and they could have different scooters, which meant you had to scooter to the border and then switch scooters. I mean, like potentially, right?
Yeah, because there are a bunch of different companies. It just so happened that Pittsburgh picked Spin.
Right. There's Spin, there's Lime, there's Bird. they only all have 4 letters, and I think that's because that's all that fits on that little pole, right? So,
Fair.
yeah.
Well, and it sounds like at least WESA reported that that bill was expected to pass with the state budget, but now the budget's stalled. So that means Spin can't operate here in Pittsburgh anymore.
Right.
Hey Pittsburgh, it's Megan. If you're craving a delicious scoop on a hot summer day, get yourself up to Bakery Square, the new local home for Jenny's ice cream in Pittsburgh. I know, it's sort of sacrilegious here to love an Ohio brand this much, but y'all, I have been a Jenny stan for years. Their flavors are so creative. The brown butter almond brittle, the brambleberry crisp, and they have dairy-free and gluten-free flavors too. Their cold brew one, it is almost better than actual coffee. And one day I might even pluck up the courage to try the everything bagel. My friend Laura says it's divine. I'm so stoked that I can finally get my from scratch Jenny's Fix right here in Pittsburgh, even at Target, Whole Foods, or Giant Eagle. Find all their flavors and fun facts at Jenny's, that's JENIS.com. It feels like basically everyone in town has reported on these at some point or another in the last couple of years, CityCast included, specifically how awful they were for wheelchair users and others. But I thought that your work was so fascinating because you got all this data from Spin about how people got hurt on them, which I don't think I'd really seen a lot of people talking about.
Well, first, thank you for saying it's fascinating. But really,
Flowers, Anne.
woo! So really, what it was, I read all the documentation, right? And part of the permit was that they had to do these monthly and quarterly reports. And when City Council had a hearing on it, they presented these numbers from the monthly and quarterly report. And I was like, well, I'd like to see those numbers. And they're like, oh, we can't. The first reaction was, we can't get that to you because that's a database.
Yeah,
and I said,
that's what Pennsylvania always says, any government body.
And I said, well, send me the database. Like,
yeah.
Like it's an Excel spreadsheet. How hard is that? Like, I'm not asking you to write anything. And so I filed a right to know request. And at first it was, the first thing was we need 30 days. And of course, my deadline's faster than that. And they sort of count on that. But I also heard that Katie Chernick, who her brother was Larry Chernick, she had written a letter to council. And so when I asked for all of the letters that had been sent in, because I listened to the public hearing, but I also wanted people sending letters, so I asked for those too.
Yeah.
And in the letter, she said, we don't want anybody else to go through this. My brother was killed on a scooter. And so I reached out to her and called her up. And she said, it was such a stupid way to die. She said, you don't want to say it's a stupid way to die, but it was such a stupid way to die.
It's a waste.
Yeah. This kid, I mean, he's not a kid, he was 35. But, he hit a pothole. The way a scooter is designed, you go over it, it just, like, if it stops suddenly, you're going to fly forward.
Yeah.
And the way those scooters are designed, they have this big pipe that comes up, and then the handlebars are in front of that. And so what happened was it intruded into his abdomen and ruptured his spleen, and he bled to death internally. So they're sort of the design of the scooter. Remember those little razor scooters? Those were just a T. So if you fell on that, you kind of hit the handlebars, but it didn't go into your abdomen like that. And so he was killed. He died that way. I mean, he hit his head, but really what killed him was the internal bleeding from his spleen. So that's what started. Like, I started with just writing about her, and
well, first you were curious, and then you want to know more, and then you hear this awful story.
Right. Well, and then the city sent me the database, and the database was terrible. People were supposed to report if they had accidents, and they did. But the reports that they wrote were so incomplete. You didn't have to give any narrative of the accident. So a lot of them were just like uh, please refund me the $80 that you charged me for this ride because it was still going while I was in an ambulance. But you don't know, I didn't know who it was. There was no names or anything else like that.
Yeah.
So, but I couldn't really get a good sense of how many people were injured because so many people, well, I don't know how many people didn't say they were injured, but I know of some who did not.
I mean, just from my own experience, like there's an option, like you can find the place to report a problem, but
Hmm.
you got to have a lot of venom in your heart to do it because it's not easy. Like they don't make it super simple to figure out how to like report something. And in my case, it was just a refund. So I had like, the axe to grind. But if you're injured, I can see how that's the last thing that you're going to be thinking about doing if you have a critical problem to deal with.
Right. This one kid, he was a Pitt student, and he had three skull fractures after falling off a spin scooter. And the only reason he reached out was because after he got out of the hospital, he was in a coma. They had to do surgery. They had to pin his head back together. They put screws in his head. And after he got out of the hospital, there was an $80 charge on his credit card. And so I was actually able to find him because in the database he said, please, here's my email. So I reached out that way. And he did get the $80 back.
It seems like having an incomplete database like that it seems like maybe a failing of our legislature or our city to not ask for more critical data. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the city wanted good data.
I hate that. I hate that answer.
Well, I don't know. And I'm not like I can't say yes or no, but if they're getting data and somebody's looking at the data, presumably, right? Or not. Maybe they just
Ideally.
ignored it.
In fairness, there's also a lot of vacancies at DOMI right now, the city's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so maybe there wasn't anybody to look at it and say, "Oh my God, this was terrible." But when you say that when you go to council and you say we've only had what was it 37 accidents out of a million rides.
That's what Spin had reported directly to council.
Right. Well, that's what and then Domi went to after that. Domi said they had 51 or 45, I think it was. I can't remember what it was out of a million rides. But then Domi went back and said, "Oh no, we actually had more." But when they said that we actually had more, um, and and then they said when there was a report of this death, but it needs to be investigated, and we can't make any decisions on information we don't have. Well, if you can't make any decisions on information you don't have and you have a bad database, then you don't have any information at all. But there we're trying to say, well, we can't really say that we had a death because we don't know that we had a death. We haven't investigated it. And they still, to this day, no one from the city but Barb Warwick, who ran the council meeting, has reached out to the Chernick family.
And I know Barb is, really passionate about transportation issues specifically. I guess what happens now? So, kind of in the waning days of all this, I saw the emails that Spin had sent to some of their super users asking folks to write into their city councilors to say that they support the
And
program.
they could get $100 for it.
I know, which, I mean, just on its
Well,
face
a
is like,
$100 coupon.
right.
Yeah.
But like they're asking users to send like effectively to lobby their city councilors to support a Senate bill, which is just like it's a weird collection of suggestions.
Right. Nobody really understood why they were lobbying city council for a Senate bill.
I
Um,
know. Does the
yeah,
city support Spin, like from what you've been able to
absolutely.
glean? Yeah, really?
Absolutely. Domi is 100% behind. I mean, the announcement from the city was that it's a pause. We're going to try to get this going again. The city is 100% behind this as one of their mobility solutions. And mobility just means, I don't know, it just means
People moving.
transportation. Yeah, I mean, you know what? Like walking is mobility and, using your wheelchair is mobility.
What about people that you talk to? If city council supports this, the legislature is a little busy right now with the budget stalemate. I don't know. Do Pittsburghers want them back?
I mean, there's a mix in it. It depends on who you are. If you have somebody who's 35 years old and able-bodied and isn't trying to transport kids, then they're great. But if you've got like a couple of kids and you have to stop and pick up some groceries or something, it's not the best way. It's not a good use. I mean, if you're at all disabled, if you have any mobility issues, really, that's not a great. They aren't terrific that way.
So what's the timeline, do you think, to figure all this out? And in the meantime, do they just sit on the road collecting dust, or are they going to round them all up?
Spin says they're going to collect them, but they're like all over the place, and you know how when you would try to move them, and if you weren't renting them and you tried to move them, they would go.
Right.
Well, now you can move them and they don't go.
So can you ride one without paying for it?
Well, if you're going downhill, sure.
Pro tip, everybody.
They also said that if they did get the legislative okay, they would put safer scooters here, which means they had safer scooters.
And they chose not to use them?
Well, they're new. Yeah. I mean, they're new. It's a new design with a larger front wheel that could handle potholes better. So maybe that was too new and they didn't put them in immediately because they had all these scooters here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not anti-scooter. I'm really not. I think there are questions that need to be answered, and people should wear helmets. For one, and they should redesign it so they don't like impale you.
That does seem like a low bar. All of this reporting is in print, the newspaper, and soon Next Pittsburgh as well. And please look out for Ann Yins. She's been doing some wonderful reporting on a bunch of different things, so you'll be hearing from her again very soon. And thank you so much for sharing all of your reporting with us.
It was a pleasure, Megan.
Some more news before you go. The so-called robotics row is growing in Lawrenceville. 6 startup companies are joining the Robotics Factory and its Accelerate program in the Tech Forge building down there. The Trib reports that the new local businesses are going to focus on all sorts of things, like visual intelligence underwater machines, robotic hands, and AI for the retail and food industries. The Accelerate program itself comes with funding and mentorship for 7 months. They really hope all the businesses will collaborate, and that whole robotics factory space is set to open in a couple weeks. And Pittsburgh police are increasing patrols in the South Side Thursdays through Sundays to try to deal with reports of violence in that entertainment district along East Carson. This past weekend, officers say they wrote 36 citations for disorderly conduct, public drunkenness, and other stuff, plus 2 felony arrests. Business owners and homeowners have been asking for help for months. A man was shot and killed in the neighborhood earlier this month. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. If you're liking the show, please tell someone, leave us a rating, a nice review, and make sure you're subscribed to our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. Also, some good news, Jens. We have a website. We'll be talking more about that in the next few weeks. It's at pittsburgh.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you soon. Happy birthday, Mama.